Eva, thank you so much for talking to me today. I'm
My
I'm really
pleasure.
I'm really excited for this conversation. I would read your bio, but would you mind just telling our listeners, just giving them a brief overview, your background, what you do, who you are, that sort of thing?
Sure. And it's always, I think, the hardest to talk about yourself, but here I go. I'm born and raised Edmonton, Alberta, from like very modest upbringing. Like both my parents were, my dad was from out like small town Alberta. My mom was from Poland, communist Poland, both farmers. And so my mom coming to Canada thought, wow, look at this amazing place. And we got to make sure our kids get educated. So that was a huge priority in our upbringing. And I like people I've been asked, how I got into law and all that stuff. And I think the story that comes to mind the most is I was kind of deciding what to do. And again, like school and professional studies was kind of in like pushed on us a little bit. And my mom was issued three traffic tickets for like having the wrong license plate and sticker registration, things like that. And I said, I'll go to court with you because English isn't her first language. It's Polish. So I'm like, I'll help at least with the language barrier. And we got there and it was so uncomfortable. And I felt we were just kind of being pushed aside. I think the prosecutor was like, I just pay half and leave. And it's like, okay, but did she do something wrong? Why does she have to pay? What is going on here? And it was just so uncomfortable. And I just kind of decided for myself, I don't want to feel to that position again and not understand what was going on. So after that, I guess I went into law school with no like aspirations of crossing the prime minister in any way. I just think I've always felt compelled when I see a wrong and I want to help people that need help. And so, when COVID was happening and so many people were saying, I feel neglected or vulnerable, I've lost everything. I'm like, well, I just feel so bad. And I felt compelled to help. And that led me to this journey. And here I am today. So that's a
Yeah.
bit of a.
So for to let people in, your I guess recent infamy is spawned from your representation of the Freedom Convoy organizers and your cross-examination of Justin Trudeau in the Emergencies Act Inquiry. So what connected you to the Freedom Convoy organizers? Like, how did that come together?
Well, at the time I was working for Civil Liberties Association, and they were called already. The Freedom Convoy was in Ottawa, and the whole world was watching. And some of the kind of more well-known people involved, that being Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, had contacted this organization I was working with, and they said, we need lawyers. Can you send some? And I was one of those that got sent into the middle of whatever was going on there. And as lawyers, we went in there thinking what we thought on our way there is that the city of Ottawa would go to court with an injunction asking them to clear up the roads or whatever. We didn't even know what the situation was because you're getting one account from mainstream media, one account from social media. And so we anticipated a court application from the city of Ottawa to bring some order to the city. Instead, as we all know now, there was a lawsuit filed by a private citizen on honking, of all things. So we had to deal with that. And then, of course, the controversy and all of what was going on with the Give, Send, Go and GoFundMe. Well, first it was GoFundMe and Give, Send, Go. And then kind of it ended up being very high tense crisis management all the time, which is what lawyers kind of do, but usually it's very slow moving. And in Ottawa, it was just fire after fire after fire.
Right. So you got involved pretty early then.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just share that it kind of, it's funny because I was very involved. Like I was right next to Keith Wilson, who kind of got infamous in Ottawa, and Tamara Leach, Chris Barber, but nobody knew who I am because I was always right in the background. So I was very connected and very involved, but not until the cross-examination of the prime minister, did anybody know who I was?
Yeah, I mean, I was following it every day. I was one. I donated what 3 times the amount that I could afford at the time, and I did it twice after GoFundMe got shut down. And yeah, I didn't see you until the inquiry, and I like, you know, I said this prior to us starting our conversation here, but I saw you and I was like, whoa, this lady's going straight for the throat. I loved it. I loved your plan of attack. I loved your line of questioning. I knew exactly what you were going for. You were slowly, especially when you were cross-examining Trudeau, you were slowly trapping him. And, you know, he went on that long diatribe toward the end where you responded by saying, yeah, that was helpful. Like, it was like he went on this long monologue about vaccines, but really what he was doing was he was chewing up your time intentionally, right? And yeah, and you just, I could see the traps that you were setting. I could see where you were going, and then you just got shut off because he took so much time. He basically did like a 2-minute advertisement for Pfizer while he was sitting there and just, you know, dancing around your questions as usual, right? Now, I want to go back in time a little bit because I want to talk about the GoFundMe situation, because that for me was that was the beginning of some, like, what was to come. As soon as they shut that down, I thought, this is bad. Like, this is really bad. This is unlawful, and they're going to try to attack this from every angle, and they don't really care what laws or rules they break. So,
or what the truth is.
Well, that's it, right? I mean, it was clearly politically motivated. I mean, everything we're seeing now is politically motivated, which is, it astounds me, right? It seems like the rule of law has just been thrown out completely. Like, now it's just like, what narrative do you believe? Are you on the same side as the people who are in power? Okay, well, then you can do whatever you want. Are you a dissenter? Are you opposed to the ruling narrative? Well, then you can't do anything. We're going to, I mean, Chris Barber and Tamara Leach are on trial looking at 10 years in prison for mischief. For mischief. I got charged with mischief.
There's 6 charges, which, you know, like obstruction of justice, but we need to get into that. What actually happened in Ottawa? Nothing. Cooperation, collaboration.
Well, that's right. And you know, what really bothers, okay, so I'm getting off track. Let's start with GoFundMe. So we have this scenario. I mean, when I saw the convoy start, I was the most hopeful of anybody. I think I was living in Vancouver at the time. I think I was more hopeful than anyone in that entire province. But as it grew, and as I was watching the numbers on the GoFundMe, I realized that this is real. This is perhaps the biggest civil rights movement our country has ever seen. I would say by a landslide, actually, not even perhaps, by a long shot. Mm-hmm. And that this was something that was, if executed correctly, would have far-reaching ramifications. And so, talk to me about when, like, were you there as the GoFundMe was kind of swelling and inflating? Like, what was the general reaction amongst yourself, like, as a lawyer? Like, how am I going to handle this? Like, what was your thoughts on it?
Well, there was no you couldn't really predict anything that was happening. So going back a little bit, I was like you, watching it on social media. In fact, the first weekend, we weren't in Ottawa. And I went to the legislature here in Edmonton, and I saw what was going on there. And I had been doing this kind of civil liberties work. We had already filed, I'm sure we had already filed the court lawsuit on behalf of Premier Pegford and a number of other Canadians in the federal travel ban. And I had been representing some Alberta doctors in the vaccine mandate, which, you know, who else can talk about their own personal autonomy but for doctors, like, right. So it was just, I'd been in this fight. And so when I went to the legislature and saw all the trucks, wow, did I feel something? And then shortly thereafter, I think it was Wednesday, we were called, and Thursday we were on a plane. The dates are something like that. Tuesday, we were called one day, we were on a plane the next day. And we were on the way to Ottawa, and the accountant at the time had a letter from GoFundMe. I don't want to get them wrong. And I wasn't following what was going on with the GoFundMe as much. I was getting secondhand information from friends, and they're like, because I wasn't on Facebook a lot, and that's where Tamara Leach had been putting a lot of her updates about what was going on. I knew there was some issues with it being released, and I didn't know how significant they were. So we actually got on the plane, and then once the accountant got on, he showed us this letter from GoFundMe. And it was already the second or third letter that GoFundMe had sent to Tamara Leach and the group, asking probing questions about where this money is going, what this money is for. And you, like, at the third time around, you knew it was trouble already, because it's a donation platform, and these are funds that are being donated for the purpose it's stated. And so we had, on the plane, prepared a 5-page letter, which I think is available publicly now. And we sent that letter in saying we're the legal representatives of Tamara Leach and this movement. And we had an hour-and-a-half call with GoFundMe the next day. And what I don't know many people know, or if this ever came across very loudly in the media, is rather than coming back to the lawyers, like, of course, everybody knew it was already a little bit sketchy, and it wasn't looking good from the participants' perspective. And without contacting us after an hour and a half call with their legal team and, Freedom Convoy legal team, they just sent an email saying it's canceled. We're going to return the money to, we're not even going to return the money. First, it was, we're going to give it to a donation of our choice. And so GoFundMe didn't even have the professional courtesy as a large organization with legal representatives to talk to the legal representatives that had an hour-and-a-half discussion with them the day before. So that's something unheard of.
Right.
Professional to professional, you would, no matter what your thoughts are, lawyers represent pedophiles and murderers. And I could tell you, just because this has come up, is lawyers representing individuals in the Freedom Convoy, they said that they had more threats, more harassing emails than they've ever had representing a pedophile or a murderer. So you could see how incredibly polarized this was, and we're kind of in the middle of it. So we were notified through, basically, it might have even been publicly that we found out that GoFundMe, had decided to cut off the donation and then take it back. And it was Governor Ron DeSantis, that said he was going to start a fraud investigation, that changed their tune, and they said, okay, we're going to return it back to the people that got it. And another point on that too is $1 million had been released to Tamara into her personal bank account, because I think GoFundMe didn't know what to do. And so they released 1 million of the 10 plus. And we had just got there. We're finalizing the letter, all of this stuff. I just got to know the clients, Tamara and Chris. And Tamara's like, I tried to take out some money, and she took out, and this is all public. Everything about this is public. There's a 70-page report about all of the funds. So there's nothing nefarious going on there. And she had taken out about $26,000, and there's receipts for everything. It was actually went to gas and to reimburse people for the gas. And she's like, I don't know, it's blocked now and it's not working. And I'm thinking, we don't have time for this. You probably just entered your PIN number wrong. We'll figure it out later. And not realizing that they actually put a hold on her account. So that happened right away too. There was no access to funds basically from the start, which is just insane.
So do you think that there was political pressure on the back end? I mean, obviously there must have been some to cause GoFundMe to shut it down.
Yeah.
Where do you think it came from? Do you think it came from the Canadian government, or do you think it came from, American American politicians or American people who are influential in that realm.
Yeah, no, I don't think American. And that's something I think some more prominent Canadians have said, like Jordan Peterson, like Americans aren't that interested in
They don't
Canadian
care.
politics. No.
No,
So when they were saying this is like mega people donating, they don't care enough to
I know.
donate to Canadian
No,
politics.
you know who was donating? Me.
Yeah.
A guy
Yeah.
said, so I'll kind of give the flip side of this because
Please.
I was in Vancouver and I'm now in Alberta. I'm now in the Calgary area. And when the convoy started and I saw the numbers just kind of like, I would refresh the GoFundMe like every second, and it was like another 10,000, another 10. It was crazy. I I the convoy for me gave me hope for the first time in what felt like forever,
Mhm.
because I was sitting in Vancouver. I couldn't even take my children to a restaurant, right? Because I wasn't vaccinated. And in a lot of ways in BC, I mean, people who were unvaccinated, I mean, it was, I don't know what the experience was like in other places, but I will say that in BC, it felt like we were, I mean, beyond second class citizens. We were an afterthought because we were seen as being seen as being the ones who are holding up progress. Just take the vaccine so we can get back to normal. And I considered it. I didn't know what we were dealing with at the time. And
Yeah.
when I read into it and I started to look into it, I'm not a scientist. I don't claim to be, but when I was reading the information as it was coming out, it just didn't look good to me. It just looked like everything had been thrown together at the last minute, and they really didn't know what they were doing. And I think that's being generous. If I want to use a more conspiratorial line of thinking, there might have been something much more sinister at work. But I knew that there was no chance I was putting that in my body or my children. So the convoy was like a ray of light. It was like finally somebody stepping up, and the people that I knew that were supporting the convoy, it wasn't just unvaccinated, unclean conspiracy theorists. I mean, there was a lot of people who were fully vaccinated who supported it, because I think everybody recognized that this was a massive infringement on our rights as free citizens, right? And so, I donated to the GoFundMe, and what really bothered me was when the GoFundMe got shut down. One thing that really actually kind of gave me even more hope was once the GoFundMe got shut down was when Ron DeSantis stepped in, because it's like, how is the Florida governor getting involved in this? Because like you said, Americans, they don't really care. I mean, most Americans don't even know like the names of our provinces, right? Like I think especially in like the metropolitan hubs like Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal, we tend to think we're the center of the universe, but we're really not. Nobody cares. And so that was a huge moment. And then when they pivoted to Give, Send, Go, I gave the exact same amount again. But what really bothered me was when that list of names of donors hit the internet, my name was on that list. So I knew that if anybody's going to be targeted, like I'm going to be one of the people targeted. And when bank accounts were frozen, I drove around in a panic for 3 days taking cash out of ATMs, because I was petrified that my money was going to be taken from me by my government, because I opposed I opposed one of their edicts. I opposed them acting in a dictatorial manner, right?
Yeah.
And so the GoFundMe gets shut down, and then you guys, and then the convoy pivots to Give, Send, Go. And what was the relationship like with Give, Send, Go? Did they just step up and say, "Hey guys, listen, do it through us. They're not going to touch your money. We will not allow it to happen." And on a side note, just so you know, I worked in the film industry for roughly about a decade, and the film industry overlaps with tech quite a bit. I will tell you this: the people who run these companies are idiots. They don't have, like, people think like when you're dealing with a tech company, they're like Facebook, they rule the world. A lot of these people is like 3 guys in a garage, right? Like they don't have legal teams, right? Like, you know what I mean? So anyways, I want to go back to the Give, Send, Go. So the convoy pivots to Give, Send, Go. And what's that relationship like?
Yeah, and I was taking notes because so much stuff always comes up. It was interesting. Well, if you look at Give, Send, Go and their ethos, it's a Christian brother and sister that started it. So you can imagine that they were very different to deal with at a minimum. And it was very clear that things were not going very well with GoFundMe. And so people in the background were already talking to Give, Send, Go. So the moment that they said they're out, Chris Barber did a video that went viral again. And it's like, don't panic, everyone. We have a new one, and just donate here. Everything's going to be okay. Because it was always, what I found with what was going on in Ottawa, it was literally every time the government or the police authorities could have taken a step, they took the wrong step. It was always a misstep. And then as a result, and this is why it was so successful, Canadians came together and found a way. And that was unity. And that, like, I can't remember how you said it before, but it gave you hope. That was the first time, but it was really just unity for the first time in so long, that
Oh yeah.
Canadians of all different backgrounds, colors, like beliefs came together as one. And that was the power of the Freedom Convoy, and that's why government officials did not like it. So with Give, Send, Go, it was a very different relationship. And gosh, we could talk about this literally for hours, but there were a lot of different people that wanted to be seen and be heard. And again, I was in the background the whole time, very close to the action, but not at all interested in taking the spotlight. And so there were lots of people connecting with Give, Send, Go. In the end, it was Tamara who, solidified that relationship. And just, it was crazy because, like you said, two people that had donated the first time, some people were like, we're going to donate 2 or 3 times the amount now this time. And just going to you said your name was released and many people, and I've seen the full donation. I'm sure it was Give, Send, Go. And one thing that just shocked and surprised me was page after page after page after page of $5 donations.
Yeah.
$10 donations. I thought, there'd be like tons of 10 grand or 20 grand, because this is a huge amount of money we're talking about. No, it was just pages of small donations. And it was so overwhelming to go through those pages one after another. Yeah. So it really was people like you. You said that's how you started it. It was just regular people.
Yeah, if I could have, I mean, I would have gotten my car and drove to Ottawa myself. I actually felt I felt a bit of guilt for just giving money, and it was actually the convoy that I had started picking up writing again, but the convoy really lit a fire underneath me. And just being in Vancouver at the time, which is, BC is it's all liberal, or it was at least. It's even then, it still felt like there was a huge weight lifted off of our shoulders. People were walking around saying hi to each other again. You could see the light returning in people's eyes, right? And it was nice. Like, it was just, it felt like we were finally having our say. Like, we had been told to follow the arrows, take the vaccine, wear the mask, stand 6 feet apart for what over a year. And it was just, we were finally getting our voice, and the convoy represented that. And even more so, Chris Barber and Tamara Leach, I felt that they were perfect representatives for this, because these are blue collar people. These aren't, lawyers, right? These aren't people. These are just blue collar people who started to drive east, and people just gravitated toward it. And, I remember, as the convoy was leaving BC, seeing videos from people on social media, even when it was just starting, and people standing on overpasses on the side of the highways, holding signs. It was like, yeah, man, we're going to do this, and I think that was really what motivated a lot of people to contribute, was the resolve. Like, we are going to do this. We're going to go to Ottawa, and we're going to make him talk to us. And if he won't talk to us, we're just going to stay put. And I didn't expect much from Trudeau in that scenario. But I definitely didn't think he would pretend to have COVID and run away.
Or disparage people the way he did.
Oh, I know. And it was like, you were right. Everything that they did was the opposite of what they should have done. It was like they were pouring gasoline on a fire to put the fire out. You know,
Yeah.
like I wrote this piece, and it was actually originally going to be an essay on my Substack, but he had a perfect opportunity, right? Like he could have stood on the steps of Parliament. He loves his photo ops. He could have had his hair done, shoes polished, standing on the steps of Parliament as those trucks rolled in. He could have walked out, been a man of the people, shaken a couple hands, said, please arrange a delegation, meet me inside, we'll be waiting. That would have been it. That would have been it. Even people like me would have had to have said, you know what? This guy is a real leader. This guy, he's going to sit down with these people, talk to them, and look, you're a lawyer, this. These blue collar people, they're not going to sit in a room with these guys and understand the language that these lawyers are spinning around them. He could have had a team of lawyers just wrap these people up until the point where they didn't even know what was going on anymore. I mean, by that point, he knew the vaccine mandates were on their way out, right? So really, he could have just negotiated some sort of terms, and then give a rousing speech on the steps of Parliament when it's over. We've heard the voice of the Canadian people. We're working out some new terms for these mandates. We understand the plight of the people and what people have gone through. My God, he would have been a hero. He would have been a national hero, an international hero, right? But he didn't do that. And from point A all the way through to Z, it's like I was baffled by the way that they reacted to everything. I was baffled by the way Parliament in general reacted. Like Pierre Poilievre and Maxime Bernier were the only people out there shaking hands. And Poilievre is smart. I don't necessarily know if he agreed with the convoy, but he knew that this was his moment to get out there and shake some hands and have some photos taken so people could see that he was really on the ground. And I still think to this day, to this day, his interactions with the convoy are kind of what carried him to now being like this international conservative phenomenon.
Yeah, and like we could talk about him as well. It's hard with that one because he did step up and then he also turned away. And you'll notice he didn't defend it and the truckers unless it was convenient, I've noticed. So that he has gotten lots of criticism on that. And I am with Canadians that criticize him for that reason, because what I've been saying more recently and since the convoy is really what you had was constituents, regular, ordinary Canadians that went to Ottawa to talk to their elected officials, to have their voices heard. And that's all he had to say. But once they were being labeled and disparaged as racists and white supremacists, none of the opposition leaders stood up, or opposition stood up. So that's where I still do have a little, and I understand it's a lot of pressure, but so was what the convoy did. So was what the role I stepped into. And it's not that's not the role that I'm meant to be playing. That's the role of an opposition leader. So I do agree. He did the right thing. Anyway, I don't really want to talk about them anyway, because there's so much more power in the people than the
That's
elected,
right.
Which is what I'm all about. But one thing I do want to say, because you started with saying you felt guilty for just donating money. And I want to say, I don't think you should ever feel that way. From my perspective, at least, is that money was so incredibly powerful. And I think that's what really, I think people were one thing, but the money was what I think affected all of the elected officials. And that in a way might have been why, even like if we're talking about the Conservative government, I don't think they knew what to do, because I think they would have thought that $10 million could have gone in their pocket, right? So there's this organization or whatever movement that's come out of left field, now has $10 million in their pocket. Do we support these people or not? So I think that there was a moment of hesitation with that, but that power with the money was something extraordinary. And I think that, when people put their life and life on the line, or profession on the line, and being advocates in this way, it's so important to support them at the same time. So I don't think there's anything to be guilty about.
Yeah, I just felt like like just being there, just being present, just being a body in the crowd, just another number in that scenario was so would have been so useful. And you know, I was watching all of the live streams. I was tuning into Viva Fry every single day because he was walking around live streaming everything. And I just felt, man, you know, I just felt like even if I was just there, just a body in the crowd, like it was so important. And, you know, I mean, you look at the ripple effect that it had, you know, I mean, the Freedom Convoy wasn't just important to Canada. It was important globally, right? The Freedom Convoy inspired the farmers' protest in Holland that eventually toppled their World Economic Forum sponsored government, right? And so that's what I'm saying is like I just felt like, man, I'm missing history here. I'm also, you know, like when the police finally moved in to crush the protest, I just felt like I know this, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I just felt like I should have been there to fight, you know, because it's like you're just watching these harmless people get destroyed by these, you know, police officers, you know, militarized police. And I heard from a few people that there were officers who definitely did not speak French or English mixed in there. So I don't know what was going on there, but and again, sorry, I'm getting a little too conspiratorial here, but it was heartbreaking. You know, it's funny because I just did another video where I say I don't cry a lot, but I cried in one scenario. And this scenario, I remember I called my mom on the phone and I was just crying because it wasn't just people being crushed. It was hope being crushed under the boot of the bureaucrats in Ottawa, you know, and you know, it wasn't Trudeau down there. It wasn't Poilievre or anything. It was like they were sitting in their castle and all these people who were just desperate just to get back to what we were. We didn't want anything more. We weren't asking. It was not a coup. Anybody who says it was a coup, they're out of their minds. They have no idea what a coup is, right? It wasn't a coup. It wasn't a coup attempt. It wasn't an insurgency. Really, it was just everyday working people just tired of being battered by this government who were finally standing up. And man, if there was anything symbolic of the world that we are heading into right now, it was the way that protest ended.
Like, you know, I just rewatched a Netflix movie about the Chicago riots in the 70s. And it was, you know, it was the political trial then too, and just rewatching it now, given what Chris and Tamara are going through. But even watching the protest at that time, there was, you know, some reactions to the police and the militarization of the police at the time there. And that was very radical left. And here we're talking about this radical right wing. So it's interesting to see that change. But then the other thing was the big difference between how Canadians responded, even when they were getting beaten. Nobody lifted a fist, not one Canadian. They just took it. And that was like a big difference here.
Yeah, I remember seeing that video of that police officer. They were like they were like feet away from the protesters, and he fainted. And that to me, yeah. So there's a video there. It's like literally right before they move in and crush everyone. And there's this line of police officers and a line of protesters, and they're all in riot gear. And one of the cops standing there, I think the girl actually walks up to him, and I can't remember what she did, but she gave him a hug or something. She gave him a hug, I think. And you can see his chest. He's just overwhelmed, and he just faints.
Wow. I haven't seen that one.
And I think honestly, it's exemplary of what we were seeing, right? I mean, these guys in this riot geared up police officers, I mean, that just the amount, I mean, I could only imagine like the amount of sorrow they must have felt for what they were doing, whose side they were on. And that's the thing, like, you know, it's like Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, but we always think that we're going to be on the right side, you know, but when you look back at Nazi Germany, when you look back at the Soviet Union, whom I'm sure your parents and grandparents experienced both, you know, it's all of the evil stuff that happened. It's filled with people who were just doing their job, right? All those acts are committed by people who are just doing their job, right?
Or ignoring,
right? But it's recently it came to light, with the Ukrainian, the SS Waffen, I don't know what you would call him, I guess enlisted soldier, volunteer who was applauded. I mean, this is a man, and this is the thing that people I don't think have really quite processed. This is a man who belonged to a unit that literally just hunted Jews and Poles for fun because they were angry. And that was it, and we gave him a standing ovation in our parliament, and to me, that I mean, the screw up is distinctly Canadian in that the very simplest details were not even checked, right? But to me, it's just like I look at all this, and it's like going back to that moment where that police officer faints. It's like they knew what they were doing. They knew the side that they were on, and they still went for it.
So with that, that there, I can't speak for all these police officers, because I do think, and I don't know how, but I do think some of them thought they were on the right side of history. And again, just going back to this Chicago riot one, you could see the lawyers for the government, they uphold the law. But there was even a difference between the lead counsel and the second one of his thoughts on the protesters. So I think there's a degree of it, because you have to abide by the law and the rule. But just one thing I recently saw, again, when I was watching the trial in Ottawa, that it's unfortunate that we can't watch the criminal case of Tamara and Chris because it's not live streamed, but I was there, and Chris's defense lawyer was putting some of the videos of this time to one of the police officers. Because his job was to compile a montage of footage, and he had neglected to put peaceful parts of it. And so she was demonstrating a bit of the other side. And, I wasn't there. I was in Ottawa, but didn't first step outside. And I wasn't even allowed to go into the red zone because you had to show proof of being an Ottawa resident, like how crazy time it was. And she was showing videos, and this was from body cam footage from police officers. So again, not on social media, some of it. And it was protesters chanting freedom, nothing vulgar there. And then even one that was shown was a protester being like, "You guys are awesome. Thank you, police officers, for everything you're doing. You guys have been so amazing." And again, it's just demonstrating how completely out of touch this was. And going back to something I mentioned, this is the thing I've been contemplating or like asking the whole time. When did this protest become illegal, and what made it illegal? Because the whole time up until that moment when they arrested Chris first and then Tamara and then had riot police, there was coordination, there was discussions, there was a working relationship between police officers of all levels and city officials. And then it just like a switch flipped. They had suggested, and this was a big part of the public order emergency inquiry, that they put a piece of paper on windshields saying that, okay, you have to leave the premises. But it was so badly written, nobody really understood it. And you have people, there were liaisons that their whole job was to communicate and coordinate with the protesters. So why couldn't you just have, like, nobody came up to us with the piece of paper, to the legal representation representatives saying like, okay, this is the letter now, and now everybody, it was just thrown onto the windshields. Like, again, it was just, that was the step that they took to say, okay, if you don't leave by this time, we're coming down with the riot police.
Right.
There wasn't even that discussion, although again, the whole time we're having what we think is a dialogue. And that's what I've recognized since is two things. Is we were dealing with, unfortunately, and I'm not very happy to say this, incredible incompetence on every level.
Right.
And then people that weren't in the position to be making any actual decisions. And the only thing I would change if I was in that situation again is I would be the biggest Karen of all time. And I'd be like, I am not leaving until I talk to a supervisor here.
Right. Right.
Somebody that has some authority and not just like we're playing phone tag, because you think you're having a good dialogue and everyone's on the same page. And then looking back, we were just like, nothing was happening after that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because it's not until something like that happens that you realize how useless a lot of the policies and the people involved are, right? And that they're really not prepared for a situation like the Freedom Convoy or anything for that matter. I mean, it's
anything more serious. Oh my
right.
gosh.
I know, and I was gonna say, like, it's a miracle that society actually functions the way it does, knowing that the checks and balances really aren't there, right? So I want to go to the invocation of the Emergencies Act because you're there. I believe that there was some sort of agreement between the city of Ottawa and the truckers, right? So
Yes.
can you go into detail on what that agreement was?
Yeah, for sure. And it was all public. So two things was something everyone always, I think we need to remember is all of this is happening so quickly. Like when even using the words convoy organizers, I have a very hard time with, and I try to correct that because that was 2 weeks. You could hardly organize a birthday party for your kid in 2 weeks, let alone the largest protest in Canadian history. So like there was no organization. Everything just happened. And then, so there's like a week and a half of the protest. And then we sat down with somebody who had volunteered to be a negotiator. That was Dean French, because he had connections with city council. And we sat down with him and Tamara and some of the protesters that organized the not-for-profit, because there was a not-for-profit that needed to take in the money. So there were some people involved in that. And that happened on Friday evening. Saturday, the terms of the agreement were negotiated back and forth with the mayor of Ottawa. And on Sunday, it was made public. So it's like things are happening like this. And the agreement is number one, it was recognized that the protesters didn't go there to cause nuisance and disturbance on City of Ottawa residents. So there was an agreement to try to reduce any of those issues and concentrate the protest onto Wellington Street, which is right in front of the Parliament. And so the more I learned about this, because of course I don't think I'm going to know everything about this protest until the day that I die, but in working with Chris Barber for his cross-examination, I learned a little bit more for the public order emergency inquiry. I heard his experience of coming into Ottawa. And coming into Ottawa, again, correspondence with the police, escorted the whole way into Ottawa through province after province into the city of Ottawa, thinking that he's going to be given a spot. All of these people are going to be given a protest spot. And again, this is so similar to the Chicago movie, which is why I think it's important to watch at this day and age. So they were told that they would have a place to protest. And he got with his truck, being the first of like hundreds behind him, onto Wellington, which was already mainly taken up. And so him and a couple other trucks behind him settled on Wellington. And then and he says, in his words, it was the police abandoned them. So then all these trucks just went and found a place to park because nobody was guiding them. They were just like, we're out of here, the police, nothing was settled. And so in the end, yeah, they were in places that probably weren't good for themselves or for the city or for the police, but it's because it just turned into a chaotic nightmare thanks to not being prepared, not helping and escorting them the way that they were told. They were supposed to put them in a park, and then I don't know what happened there in the end. So like these people that came from all parts of it, they don't know Ottawa. It's minus 30 degrees. They just parked wherever they could. And so Chris and Tamara, they recognized this was, a bit of a mess. And so on their own initiative, it wasn't that the city or the police came to them and said, okay, how can we manage this? It was like, okay, you guys have a problem. Let's try to address this. And so initially that was the plan, is to have a concentrated location somewhere in Ottawa, and they were going to a shuttle bus people back and forth. Right. Because they knew this was big. And so that's kind of what the negotiated terms were going to be. Okay, we're going to go on to Wellington Street, and then you could shuttle back and forth as much as you want. And when we met with the City of Ottawa representatives, they basically were like, you could stay here for a year if you're on Wellington Street. Wow. Because they knew that the issue was with the federal government. Right. And at that point, the city, at least the mayor, I think, had lost hope himself in the federal government stepping up. And then all of the concerns were on a local level. And so, and they have quite the relationship. That was Mayor Watson and Trudeau. They were politically aligned. And I think that he kind of felt he was abandoned as well by the federal level of bureaucracy and policing. And so he was like, fine, I guess we have to deal with this. My citizens can't handle this. The councillors were going crazy. The police force was saying this is an insurrection and everything. So, he had to do something. So it was to concentrate the trucks into one location, make it more manageable for everyone, and then really come back to what they had originally thought they were there for. Right. That was the agreement, is to have trucks on Wellington. And the one thing so the government and the police kind of wanted it out of both sides of their mouth, because they were saying, okay, well, Tamara and Chris, they want them to be the leaders because now they're taking the fall for it. But at the same time, they knew they had no control over people. Mm-hmm. But, they stepped up. And like you said, they were they turned out to be the right ones. And I think that all happened for a reason, because people connected with them. So there was a likelihood most people would follow them in this plan. But of course, there would be some that would be like, F you, who are you to tell me what to do and where to go? But then at least we've concentrated some of the issues with the noise and the bylaw infractions, and it's just, contained to one area. So that was the agreement. Yeah. And so do you think that the chaos was, just overall incompetence? Or do you think that there was an element there that was perhaps kind of leaving an open door for the federal government to step in and kind of, lay the smack down? Like, do you think, is it just pure incompetence and just they're rolling in and all of a sudden the cops just disappear and now it's like, hey, we got to figure out, I guess we got to organize this ourselves? Or is it a little bit of, well, let's see what they do, and if they do something, that they break any laws or infringe on any bylaws or anything, then we got them? Like, do you think there was any of that involved? So I have to say, I think a lot had to do with incompetence, and you just saw it, like I said, on every level. And it's really unfortunate, because during the Public Order Emergency Act, it was like, well, there was this much, and it was a lot of finger pointing. This organization said this one should have done it. And then it was like, well, we needed more resources. It's like, look, people, resources are not the issue. It's the competency. To start with. And I've said this many times, the Ontario Police force was the most professional and reputable, the OPP, but other levels were not. The one thing where it's questionable about whether or not it was nefarious, but I think it was just political gains, or trying to, and this was well discussed in the public order emergency inquiry, and Brendan Miller did a great job with this, was the earlier emails that came out, even before any of the protesters got to Ottawa, with Minister Blair's office already having a narrative that these are racist, that they're not here to abide by the law, and we will not stand for this. And those were words that he used in his speech, but were in the cabin speech on the first weekend, but they were prepared prior to any protesters even getting to Ottawa. But this is where I wonder whether that was, well, I guess, nefarious to the public good and public interest, because it was a self-interest on a political level, I think, more so than...
Yeah. Well, I mean, even that line of like, these are racists and misogynists and all this, I mean, it's incredible to me, because that line broke down like immediately, right? Because you just go on social media and there's Sikh people with tents handing out food to protesters. There's Black people there, white people, Asians, like it was a mix of everyone, right? So to say that these are white supremacists or racists or whatever, I mean, to me, it's like, I don't know, it's just foolish. It's like, you know, you got to come up with something better, right? Like they're just kind of, but it
worked.
Well, it did and it didn't. I mean, I think that there's an objective truth, no matter how much you want to believe in subjective reality. There's an objective truth that is clear to everyone, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. And I think that was with the convoy. There was an objective truth there that was very obvious and very clear to everyone, right? And I think that's why, to this day, right? Like, I mean, I would argue that the convoy destroyed Trudeau's political career, because
his reaction to it, for sure.
Well, his reaction to it, exactly. Like I said, he had a perfect opportunity to actually unite Canada and unite the world. He could have shown the world, like, this is what we do. This is what a leader is. Look, the country has spoken. Maybe it's not everybody, but it's a large enough percentage of people who are obviously very passionate about this issue. I'm going to step forward and talk to them, negotiate them, talk them off the ledge, essentially, right? Like he could have even framed it that way, right? But he didn't. And that was the thing, is it was you're right. It was the reaction to the convoy that was the undoing of his political career. You know, it's funny because I hear a lot of people on the left talking about, oh, the convoy failed. No, the convoy was wildly successful. Look at Trudeau then versus now. I mean, the man can't go anywhere. He literally can't walk outside, right? I mean, this entire country is just, it's just brimming with fury at this point. And you know, I mean, I don't know if he'll actually be able to, once he's done, which I think we're got to be getting close to it now. I don't think we're going to get to 2025 without an election. But once he's done, I don't even know if he can live in this country, right? Because no matter where he goes, he's viewed as a tyrant, right? As an ideologue. And here's the thing about him, and we're going to get to this, but I'll say this right now. When you were cross-examining him, he was exactly what I've always thought he was. He's not Hitler or Stalin or any of these vicious, brutal dictators. He's an ideologue for the sake of being an ideologue, because he doesn't have an original thought in his head. And that's the problem, right? Is that he and he's reflective of a lot of our modern day society, right? A lot of people just think things that they've been handed and fed to them without really thinking them through or really parsing it out and finding the logic in it, right? And he's the same way. You know, whenever you trap Trudeau, and you did a fantastic job at doing this. I mean, he literally launched into an advertisement for vaccines because you had trapped him against the wall and he didn't know what to say. That you got him to a position where he actually had to think, and he broke down and went into a long monologue about the safety and efficacy of COVID vaccines. I mean, you successfully exposed who he really is in that moment, right? And I think that's just what he is. He's just an ideologue, but he's not somebody who is, you know, deeply committed to any ideology. He just attached himself. He found himself in a position where He became the leader of the Liberal Party through the strength of his last name only. I don't think he ever wanted to be in politics, nor do I think he ever had designs on being prime minister. I don't think that was just, from what I understand, his brother who passed away was the one who was being groomed to actually enter politics. And I think Justin Trudeau he's just a beach bum. He just wants to hang out on the beach and go surfing and smoke a joint and hang out. That's the sense I get from this guy. And so, I mean, that's what makes him incredibly dangerous, is that he's highly susceptible to suggestion. Right. And he's not somebody who thinks things through. And that's why when you trap him, or when you see him, give a speech or in a press conference or in an interview, he just spews out buzzwords. It's just buzzword after buzzword after buzzword, because he doesn't have anything else.
Can I put to you something?
Okay.
I think that how you're describing Trudeau is who Canada is right now.
Yeah.
And I got this not for myself. It was Russell Brand made that comparison with President Biden, and he actually said he's the perfect politician, president for the United States of America, because it's broken, it's old, it's demented, it's, and I find that it's exactly the same for Canada. Canada doesn't have any clue who we are, what we stand for, and Prime Minister Trudeau is the perfect example of who Canada is right now. And everything you were saying, I totally agree with.
Yeah,
that's who we are as a country right now. Unfortunately, you see it. We talk about diversity and inclusion. The hell happened to us for the last 3 years? It was actually disgusting. We can't talk to each other anymore. Like, I am hesitant to tell people that I was representing the Freedom Convoy. Again, like I told you, lawyers that represented murderers and pedophiles never had this much hate. What happened to us?
It's because, and again, I think your familial history, has a lot of experience with this. It's what happens when ideology takes the wheel, right? I think in Canada, we were very fortunate for a long time. We didn't really have to think about who was governing us. You ask most Canadians and they can't name more than 2 or 3 past prime ministers, right? I mean, this is, I think, the first time where every Canadian knows who our prime minister is, right? We were really fortunate because we lived in a scenario where we didn't really have to be involved. Things just went, and Canada was never an economic powerhouse, but we were never a third world country either, right? Like we kind of piggybacked off of the success of the United States, and we were, I mean, even culturally, right? Like culturally, we just absorbed the runoff from the US, right? We're 5 years behind where they are perpetually, right? And now I think the good thing about Trudeau, and exactly what you just said, is that there is a backlash, and it has forced us to examine our national identity and figure out who we are. And we're figuring that out. It's a slow, painful process. But again, I think it was that it was the convoy that sparked that conversation, and Trudeau thereafter kind of once again repeatedly putting us in a corner and us having to figure out who we are. And I think we're slowly getting it, but we have to, in my opinion, at least, we just have to purge just political ideology from our culture. We have, and I mean that on the left and the right, because you see it on both sides.
What is it anymore? Like, that's what I'm like, who's left, who's right? I think I voted every party and color since I've been able to vote at this point. So like, I don't, and so many people have said politically homeless, but one thing I do want to say too is you were talking about, all the people, and I just think this is such a beautiful story. So I wanted to share it, like how many different
Please do.
people were in Ottawa, but it was I was doing some interviews for the Public Order Emergency Inquiry, and there were some Indigenous like clan mothers that were there. And when I was talking to them, like I had goosebumps when I was taking down basically their story. And who's been fighting this fight longer than the Indigenous people of Canada, and being told what to do and how to do by the all-knowing government. So they were like, we've been here. And then they both said that being in Ottawa was the first time they ever felt true reconciliation in this country. And I was like, oh my God, that's what it was. And that was the power of it. This is like just people coming together, united. So yeah, that was one thing I wanted to add.
Yeah, I mean, so my mother is Plains Cree Indian. I'm technically Métis, right? And yeah, for me, it felt like with the convoy, like we're taking this back. We're taking it back. Not just Indigenous people, but the people. We're taking this back, right? And it was so empowering, and I mean, still to this day, like I came to Alberta. Like my mom is originally from Red Deer. My dad was from Cold Lake originally, right? And I spent many summers and freezing cold winters in Alder Flats, Alberta, on my grandparents' farm, right? And the convoy was what brought me back here, because I saw Alberta stand up. I knew a lot of those truck drivers were from Alberta. Tamara Leach, from Alberta. I was like, that's where I got to be. I got to be where the fighters are, because the fight isn't over and we're not even close. And I was like, when the rubber meets the road, I got to be where the fighters are. Got to be with the people who are going to fight, because in BC, it was just a lay down and die mentality,
Yeah. And so when I was saying, left, right, whoever, whatever in United, it's because I think what's happened in Canada, and it's because it's been so, good and nobody's cared. It's become a bureaucratic, technocratic political class. And that's not left or right anymore, because it's become a bit self-interested about maintaining that power, that relationship. And it's the people. So that's what it was, especially in Ottawa. You see it more. One great comedian, I heard him say, in Ottawa, you have federal government workers and Uber Eats drivers. That's Ottawa. And I think he's basically got it right there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that's the problem we have in Canada right now, that we really need to recognize is
we've lost sight. And right and left and right, there were always illusions, right? I mean, they're literally just it's the old cliche, right? Two wings of the same bird, right? And you don't really get to see. It's funny because there's like, in the middle of the left and in the middle of the right is where you get to see how they're diametrically opposed. But as they become more radical, they become more mirror images of each other, right? And the scary thing about what we're facing now is that it seems like we're at that point where they meet on the radical end, where we're seeing something that resembles fascism at the top and something that resembles Marxism at the bottom, right? And I think that's the danger. And going back to what you were talking about with a national identity or just knowing who you are, again, referencing your own familial history, your parents, your grandparents, I'm sure their deep understanding of what it meant to be Polish is what allowed them to get through a lot of what they dealt with in Poland, right? I've always felt like we have never dealt with anything even remotely close to what has occurred through Eastern Europe, during the 20th century and even before, right? But because we have never experienced that, we don't know what the steps leading into it look like. And that's the part that scares me, is that, when Trudeau evoked the Emergencies Act, right, it was like he's essentially become a dictator in that moment, right? And, people on either side of the political argument, they seem to be missing the point. The point isn't that people are being crushed. The point isn't that the truckers are occupying Ottawa and this is an insurgency or a coup, which is insane. The point is that we now have a dictator. We now have a leader who's made himself all powerful. And when people's bank accounts and assets were frozen, that was another step toward something that we've seen before that has ended really horribly. And I think that's the thing that we need to be focused on. We need to keep our eye on that because it's not over.
Yeah. And so, I have an interesting background, like you said, Polish, so communist country background. And my mom lived it. My dad was born and raised in Canada. But also I'm really involved in the yoga community, and I'm a lawyer by profession, so law and order. But in all three of those different backgrounds of mine, it was polarized. So you would think people from communist Poland, they, like you said, they would see it coming. They didn't. And there was division, like everywhere. In the yoga community, like, hippie yogas, no, divided. You're the enemy. And same in the legal community, which shocked me so much too. Especially with the Emergencies Act, because clearly I was there at some point. So some lawyers that knew me, I wrote something. All I wrote when the Emergencies Act was invoked, not even then, when the beatings were happening, I said, sad day in history. And some lawyers just reamed into me. You're occupying a city. And I'm like, so that you're a lawyer and you think that the measure that the police should take is beating people because they're like there's a bylaw infraction? What kind of law are you practicing in Canada? And so that's one thing that I still haven't reconciled in my mind in those three different backgrounds and how, but that, I think that just goes to show that this was ideology, this was fear, this was emotional, this had no rationale in it, because it wasn't connected to any of like the backgrounds or the experiences these people had or were supposing to be.
Right.
So it's still something I'm grappling with anyway.
Yeah, like actually the book that's right behind me, I have it turned around because it's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and it unfortunately has a big giant swastika on the front and on the side. So it's like if I have it turned this way,
constitutional law in Canada.
Yeah, like if I turn it this way, people are going to get the wrong
Yeah.
idea. So I just cover it. But I'm reading that book for the second time right now, right? And all throughout the book, you're like, Jews are walking around with a Star of David armband around their arm, and you're like screaming to yourself in your head, like, why aren't they getting out? Like the writing is on the wall. It's coming. It's coming. But it's because nobody ever thinks it's going to go there. Right? Like hindsight is 2020, right? People go, well, if I was a Jew in Nazi Germany, I would have got out of there, before the Olympics, before they were shut out of entering businesses or anything. No, you wouldn't have. You would have stayed, because in your mind, you never think you're going to be staring down the barrel of a gun one day or put in a gas chamber or worse, right? Mm-hmm. You never think that's going to happen. Nobody ever thinks it's going to be them. And, from the day Hitler wakes up in a hospital bed in 1918 at the end of the First World War to the day he takes power, the day he's appointed chancellor by Hindenburg, right? There's 15 years. It was a 15-year process, right? People always think you just wake up one morning and the tanks are rolling down your street. It does not work like that. It doesn't happen like that. It's incremental. And that's why we have to be vigilant, right? And like you said, with the polarization, right? What a lot of that is it's just fear of the other, right? And it's just ignorance of people outside of your bubble, and that's the way that we stop that. And I want to go back to the convoy. That's what the convoy was successful in doing. Mm-hmm. There was no other anymore. It was all of us versus the very, very small actual fringe minority, and we were the majority. See, that was the trick that they tried to play. They tried to make it sound like it was just a small group of people, just a handful of miscreants. We'll get them taken care of. But we all knew because we were all on the same side at that point.
Mhm.
Right. So I want to go to the day, February 14th, Emergencies Act is am I saying it right? Is it evoked or invoked?
Invoked.
Invoked.
Yeah.
Doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Yeah.
Emergencies Act is invoked. Are you in Ottawa?
Yeah.
So what like, as a lawyer, what goes through your mind in that moment?
Well, again, what the hell is going on? Because we're talking to police every single day. And of course it's tense, but because they're making it tense. It's not because the situation is tense. There's nothing to be tense about. It's people with hot dogs and bouncy castles. So I was actually in a meeting with Tom Marazzo, who was quite involved in some logistics and helping out, and former Premier Brian Peckford. And we were talking about, I can't even remember what it was at some point, and then Tamara Leach and Keith Wilson came into the room saying, and we had heard that likely the Emergencies Act will be invoked, and they came in and confirmed that it would be. So here we're sitting with former Premier Brian Peckford, who is the last living signatory of the charter, and he's like, what the hell is happening? And
That
it
must have been so surreal.
Yeah. And he's like, okay, we need to do a press conference. Like, just so matter of fact. So then we had a press conference. So Tamara Leach sat down with, this is how, like, what illegal activity, what is going on, that, you know, these two people are having a press conference, nobody's getting arrested, nobody's being told that this is wrong, it's civil disobedience, which is what Brian Peckford was advocating and saying, this is what needs to happen. A former premier and elected official who had also fought some of these fights with Justin Trudeau's dad, which is another just incredible part of this all. Right. And so yeah, we're so crazy protesters that we hold a press conference.
Right. Right.
And all media is invited. The next day, there's another press conference with like one former OPP officer, one former military, and one former RCMP, I believe, were the three. And they hold a press conference. Again, look at these crazy radicals that are holding press conferences.
Right.
So that's 2 days of the Emergencies Act. Then the next day, it was organized by former veterans to have like singing "Oh Canada" at the War Memorial. So I was there, Tamara Leach was there, Chris Barber was there. And this was actually the only chance that Keith and I had a chance to kind of walk around a little bit of the protest, because again, nobody really knew what was going on. That's day 3 of the Emergencies Act. Nothing. Was singing "Oh Canada" at the War Memorial. And then that evening, Chris Barber was arrested and Tamara Leach was arrested. So day 4 is when the rioting started. But again, it's kind of like, communication is key in these cases, and that we're just kind of going about the day doing press conferences.
Yeah. So are you on the ground when the police start moving in to crush the protesters?
So we were asked to move to another, once Chris was arrested, we kind of anticipated something was going on, because again, they forgot to tell us that what's happening. And so we were moved to another hotel, and where the hotel Keith and I were at, we could actually see like huge buses coming in and police after police. Well, actually first 2, we saw like, towing vehicles coming and taking vehicles. We didn't know from where, we could just see it on the street. And then we were watching it live, but like we could see them coming in, and kind of the back end of it all and the chaos of what was going on.
So I in your cross-examination, or I can't remember if it was you or somebody else, but they had mentioned that there was some sort of agreement for the convoy to move the trucks, that there was some sort of agreement reached with the city of Ottawa that the convoy was going to leave altogether or kind of peacefully relocate somewhere else. And I think it was you, because I think you brought this up to Trudeau in your cross-examination of him. And then for whatever reason, this agreement had been reached, the trucks were beginning to move, and then bang, he invokes the Emergencies Act. which
Yes.
really, I mean, was unnecessary to begin with, but was even more unnecessary now that the agreement had been made and the trucks were moving. So at that point, I mean, are you just kind of just like completely taken off guard by it, or is it something that you guys were kind of expecting to happen?
No, it was totally, we were caught off guard. Looking back now, we kind of see it more, but even the police were. This is where I'm saying it was just, if you were there, you would just see how much incompetence was there. We were in a meeting with some of the police officers and they're telling us one thing. Then they get a call and they're like, sorry, I have to take this. Come back. And they're like, okay, so everything we said off the table, everything's changed now. Because what happened too is after that agreement was reached, a chief of police, Peter Slowly, resigned. And so then, and that's something, at least, people in the police were like, okay, well, he resigned doesn't mean that who's coming next is better. And that's what we reckon. And then often people forget another guy came in. I can't even remember his name at this point, and he resigned immediately. He was in power, had that role for a few hours, and then it was interim chief of police, Steve Bell, that was like,
He
he's
was
the
ready.
one that went on the record saying, we will hunt you down, we'll find you wherever you are, we've got you. And it's like, for what? Standing on the street peacefully, man?
That was a big like big red flag when Chief Slow, because Chief Slowly seemed like he was trying to be as objective as possible in this scenario. He was trying to be, just do his job.
I'm going to stop you for a sec because I've been trying to figure him out. And I think, I don't know if that's the case really, because another example of incompetence, I think he had just taken on that role right before COVID started. So that was one thing he said at the public order emergency inquiry, is he never had a time to like bond with the people. They were all on Zoom and all this stuff. Okay, like if police officers can't get together and like figure shit out.
Yeah.
Like maybe we've already lost it, if we're trying to figure things out on Zoom of how to keep the peace and law and order. Anyway, so it was, I think there was, this is the thing, I think there was a lot more political and self-motivations and that's what I saw at the public order emergencies inquiry. At that point, it was like everybody for themselves.
Yeah.
And for the first 3 weeks, I was like, what are we even doing here? Because he's blaming this guy and that guy, that organization is blaming him. So I don't know if I would just say he was trying, because I think he had his own self-interest over and above what was going on in all.
Yeah. I watched his testimony and I just, he just struck me as a guy who was just a deer in headlights. He really didn't know what to do. He didn't, and I think you're right. It was more self-interest than anything, but he just found himself in a position where he was like, what? And I think that he was purposely removed and replaced by whoever the guy in between was. But then that guy was removed because they were looking for somebody who was ready to crack heads. Yeah. And I think that Steve Bell was their guy. And when they found that guy, they put him in there, and that was basically it, So I want to kind of fast forward to the Emergencies Act Inquiry because that was, to me, it was just such a disappointment, not in the way that the lawyers such as yourself cross-examined witnesses. I just felt like there was just certain people just kind of felt like it was a formality. Like, we got to do this so that we can get on to the next thing, right? And here there's people like you who are committed to digging into this thing and figuring out what the hell was, was the thinking behind it. And I want to talk to you about cross-examining Justin Trudeau, because first of all, did you guys draw names out of a hat? Was it like, or was it like, did you guys sit down and say, okay, who's going to be the best person to do this? Like, how was that decision made? Like, who was going to be the one to cross-examine him?
So I believe everything always happens for a reason. And in the end, it was me. And so my role going into the public order emergency inquiry was as a solicitor. So we don't usually make those distinctions in Canadian law, but because Keith and I were very involved, obviously in the whole protest itself and giving legal advice at the time. Well, and Keith ended up being a witness, so I wasn't sure if I would be, because talking about the process, it was really just all last minute. That what we went through, nobody should go through with the kind of pressure and a role we had. Of course, being a government lawyer, it was very different. But so our Keith and my role going into the public order emergency inquiry was as solicitor. So like background, getting information, and the litigators on the file were Brendan Miller and Bathsheba Vandenberg. And so they were the ones that had the task of the cross-examinations and motions and things before the commission. None of us expected it to be that intense and crazy, and continuously getting last minute documents and trying to get unredacted documents so that we could actually do proper cross-examination, and the timelines. Like, one thing just to talk about, you don't cross-examine a witness in 10 minutes. That's not a cross-examination. This was theater, really, because you normally have half a day to cross-examine, hours to cross-examine, a full day to cross-examine. And one thing, just going back to Peter Slowly, this is where I can, even as a lawyer, say that I was very distraught of how the process ran. Is it was about whether or not the federal government was justified in invoking the Emergencies Act. The only person they had give evidence for 2 days was former Chief of Police Peter Slowly, who has had nothing to do to whether or not the Emergencies Act was invoked. That was not his decision. So why wasn't RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki on the stand for 2 days, or Prime Minister Trudeau? So when you just look at that one fact, that was not meant to be a process to really dig in and figure out what that was about, and then everything else that we had to deal with on a procedural level. So Brendan Miller did a fantastic job with the evidentiary record. Like, you know, all of the witnesses from at least police authorities, none of them said that they needed or requested the Emergencies Act. What more do you need? And then we dug into it more with that, but that evidence was clear on the record. Then we have Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to cross-examine, and it was a request of the clients to talk more from the voice of Canadians. And so I was asked, and I was very obviously pleased and humbled to do the questions in that way, because I felt I could bring that voice on behalf of Canadians. I was so involved and close to everything, so I had seen it all. I was familiar with it, and it was at like basically 10:30 the night before that we made that decision, and then it was time.
So did you sleep? Like, are you just laying in bed going like, okay, can I say that word? Like, can I call him an asshole, or do I just like what's that like? Like, I mean, so it's 10:30 at night. You're alone, and you're like, I have to come up with a plan of attack.
Well, we were working on it as a team, so I wasn't alone, and we
Gotcha.
we're working together on questions. And throughout the inquiry, and before, like I said, my role was as a solicitor. So one of the things I had kind of decided to do is try to get stories and recollections of people, why they supported it in Ottawa and outside, because again, we didn't know what this process would be like. And we had put forward at least 25 names of witnesses that we wanted to be cross-examined, including at least 10 on Ottawa residents. Right. And so I was gathering all these stories, and like, as people are giving evidence, I'm reading these stories, like my heart is breaking, some of these things. And I didn't know if when those stories would ever be heard, if they would be heard. So one of my thoughts was the whole inquiry is that would be so great to put to the Prime Minister, the voices of all these people I've been reading their like recollections of. And so that was part of it. And of course, we wanted to ask about the agreement to bid and what his decision was. And so we were working on it as a team, but that's like, and you nailed it right from the beginning, is we knew the moment he would have an opportunity, he would just political talking points, why everything was perfect and why he's the best prime minister. We knew he wouldn't get any answers. We wouldn't get any evidence from the Prime Minister of Canada. So we made it about the questions and putting it to him what he wouldn't hear. The reasons people, the voice of Canadians, like you said, that opportunity that he could have had. Well, I guess if we think about it now, I took that opportunity to step up where he didn't.
Yeah, I thought the impact statements were brilliant. I thought because here you are, a lawyer cross-examining the prime minister. You could have just asked him a line of questions and have him dance around it and play the cat and mouse game, but you actually forced him to listen to Canadians, which was, I just thought it was brilliant, because he, for the first time ever, had nowhere to run. He had to hear from people the consequences of his actions. And I think I honestly, I rewatched it today because I just kind of wanted to see it again. And in that moment, you can kind of see a small glimmer of something resembling remorse, right? Like, and then when he answers and he goes, well, it was deeply, he wasn't touched, but the real person that's deep down inside of him, you could kind of see a little bit that it was still there, and that it was connecting to that, with Justin Trudeau, I don't think, because he's been so isolated his whole life, he's a Laurentian elite, right? Like, he's Pierre Trudeau's son. Like, he's never existed in the real world. He's able to do the things that he does because there is a wide gap between him and everybody else. There's a big disconnect. So like when he brings in carbon taxes and average people can't fill up their car to drive to work anymore, or they can't afford to buy groceries, he can go on TV and rhetoric, right? But he doesn't actually have a connection to it because he's not them, right? Yes. And he never has been, and he never will be. So when people are saying, I can't afford to buy milk anymore, it doesn't register to him because he has never been in that position. He's never even been remotely close to it, right? So, when the inquiry's over and the ruling comes down, is it a ruling? I don't know. I'm so stupid when it comes to the legal system that, like, I think every lawyer is Matthew McConaughey in A Time to Kill. Like, I don't have any idea, So when that ruling comes down, what's your reaction to it?
I'm just on a podcast here.
You got visitors. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all good.
We'll wrap it in 2 minutes here.
No problem. But I honestly couldn't believe it, because like I had just said, is we had all the evidence there that this was not necessary. Nobody asked for it. I was there. But at the same time, I guess what else was I expecting? And this is one thing we had told all the people that were supportive of the convoy, because they were like, this is just going to be, a fake commission, and it's his uncle. So what's the point? And you guys are wasting everyone's time. And we thought maybe that was the case, but watch it for yourself. Listen to the evidence for yourself so that you know whether or not it's a whitewash, and you could make your own decision. And if that's what the establishment is going to do, at least you know for yourself. And that's where I came up with what I came up with in the end. It was like, seriously, there was no reason to do this. It was just incredible mismanagement. We sat there, like I said, for 3 weeks. I was like, why are we even here? Nobody's mentioned the protesters for 3 weeks. It's just, I didn't have enough resources, and that level of policing failed, or she didn't tell me this, or I didn't read that briefing. And then you get this 2,000-page report. But that was the other thing we had reminded people that were supportive of the convoy, is this had no legal bearing. So many were like, is this going to be the end of Trudeau and will this put him in jail? It's like, no, it's an investigative report.
Mm-hmm.
It actually has no legal bearing. And, I'm a little bit naive about things because I think if you fight for truth and justice,
I
it
know.
will, that's the thing to do because it will be good in the end. And so I thought just fighting that fight would be enough and good. And I'm still happy to have done it. But like I was saying, people heard the truth for themselves because thank God it was live broadcast and people were recording it, live streaming. And number two, what was Rouleau going to say? Like, yeah, you screwed up, but we're not going to do anything about it because he couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
So, thinking about it more now, like, why would he? Why would Rouleau find that it was improperly invoked? And then what are the consequences? There are none. So one thing I'm reminding people more recently is there still is a federal court action, and fingers crossed we get a different result because that is legally binding. The
Right.
federal government can say, yeah, the proper measures weren't taken and that invocation of the Emergencies Act was not according to the Emergencies Act, so it would have been illegal. So there is still that opportunity, but with the commission, like would have been a slap on the hand one way or another.
Would it have set a precedent for the actual legal case? No.
No, and there was even a massive challenge to get some of the evidence into the evidence, but it wouldn't be a precedent. It was still just they were able to take some of the information and evidence, but the federal government fought it tooth and nail too. So in the end, they were able to take some because they wanted all of the records and information to go into the federal government challenge or the federal court challenge. But in the end, they agreed to certain pieces, and I wasn't involved in that one, so it's only secondhand information.
So I know you got to run here pretty quick. I'll let you go, but I just want to ask you just a few more questions. First, I want to ask: have there been any ramifications for you being involved in all of this? Have there been any political? Have you been targeted at all?
It's been the most difficult thing I've ever done, for sure. And somebody explained, because I was targeted by the very interesting left that we have these days. And it doesn't help that some of my clients kind of egg it on, or former clients do. So somebody explained it like I was the most loved and hated lawyer at the time after cross-examining the prime minister. So certainly I was targeted by Canadians, certain Canadians that had certain views. But I definitely, without meaning to, and this is why going back to Pierre Poilievre and the elected officials, is I took a massive target on my back. And I've been unemployed for a while since, because not too many law firms are going to look for somebody that's been in this position. They want government contracts as well. And so here I am, fighting for the little guy, which is something I've always done. But at the same time, there's a reason I'm doing it. And it led me to fund an organization. I hope you're familiar with it, Empowered Canadians. I didn't even talk to you about it before. And it was because, being thrust into this position, and not like I asked for it, it just happened. And putting myself out there, I recognized how uninformed people are, or how apathetic people have been. And I don't know which is the chicken and the egg. But I just felt I can't keep responding to people, number one, on Twitter or social media, and helping them understand the incredibly complex political and legal systems. So I decided to found an organization that, number one, helps people understand it. So we started a civics class for people to understand these processes and systems, and to try to get Canadians to have a stronger voice. And this is completely nonpartisan. I don't care what your beliefs are, but if you want to engage with your elected officials, let's do it sophisticated. Let's do it informed, because people are asking there's municipal leader. Well, actually, number one, they forget that they even have municipal counselors and leaders and so school boards. Like there's a huge opportunity to get involved, and most of our attention is focused on the federal government, where by the time we affect change there, it's going to take a lot of hard work and time. But on a local level, in a community level, there's such an opportunity. So that's part of what I'm trying to help in Canada, is just engage, but informed, sophisticated engagement instead of yelling on social media.
That's so beautiful. And for anybody listening, the link to Empower Canadians is right below this video. I think that's absolutely brilliant. I knew about it, but I didn't know that much. And I might actually sign up myself, because as I told you, I'm kind of a dummy when it comes to a lot of this stuff. Like, you know, I understand politics, I understand history, but in terms of understanding how things work at the local level, right? Or just understanding how you can affect change just on a small scale is so important, because you're right. We tend to aim for the big target, right? Trudeau is the big bullseye.
Yes.
But there's a million other bullseyes around him that we could be aiming at that are easier to hit, that will actually have more of an impact, right?
Yes, and just so you know, we're all dummies with this, and I mean this as elected officials too, because that's where there's such an opportunity for citizens and Canadians, because the system has just gotten so complicated and so inundated and bloated that I don't think they know what they're doing. I've learned so much in the last 2 years. So talk about dummies. You're looking at one right here, but I'm learning more. I'm gaining more knowledge, and what knowledge I have, I want to share, and I'm going to continue to gain knowledge. And I think there's a huge opportunity for all of us. And the second thing is that just nobody, that educational component has been lost. And so I think it's cool. I think it's fun. Like, and I'm hoping to get youth involved as well. Like, not every kid wants to do hockey or maybe knitting. So if they're interested in politics and debating, I'm hoping I can provide that to Canadians.
I hope you do too, because I think apathy is the enemy. I think it's our number one problem in Canada, just being apathetic and just not feeling anything or thinking anything or wanting to be involved. You know, I listened to your talk with Brian Peckford today. I'm a gigantic fan of him. And when he came out and spoke out against what was happening, you know, with the vaccine mandates, to me, I was like, that's a big one, man. That's an atomic bomb. That's the last living signatory on our charter, right? Like that's the guy. If you want anybody's opinion, that's the guy. Now, just in closing, I know you got to run. I want to ask you one last question. This trial with Tamara Leach and why am I Chris Barber? Oh yeah, I was blanking. Sorry, Chris, if you're seeing this, I should know that. Their ongoing trial. I mean, from your perspective, from a legal perspective, I mean, does the government have really anything to throw at these guys? Like they're trying to lock these people away for 10 years. Now, I saw that Tamara Leach's bail violation charge was dropped. Do you see just charges just kind of dropping as time goes on?
I don't know what, like, I don't know what evidence they have against them to lock them up for 10 years. I don't think anybody's seen it so far. So that's my answer. I sat in the courtroom for 3 days and I didn't feel good about the justice system in Canada at that time. It was just, like we talked about, broken, incompetent, slow. And I was like, is this a serious trial about these people going to jail for 10 years, or are we just going through the motions? So I think in the end, it will, I think there won't be any jail time. I think there's been a lot of problems in their case, but why are we even going through the motions is the better question.
Yeah, it's a waste of time and money. And not only that, but you're playing with these people's lives. And the only crime that they're guilty of is standing up for themselves, which is unreal,
Yeah, and being a voice for others.
And being a voice for millions of people who are suffering. And that's it. Anyways, Eva, I know you got to go. Thank you so much for your time. I was so excited to have this conversation. I still have like a million questions I didn't get to ask, so I hope that we can do this again sometime. Um, Eva, can you please tell everybody where they can find you, where they can get more information on Empower Canadians? Like, just please, just lay it all out there.
Well, thank you. And sure, anytime I'm happy to come on and chat more. So I didn't think I'd be doing this professionally. So my Twitter handle is forever79. Find me there. It helps with reminding people my name, I hope.
Yeah.
I have a website, chipiuk.ca, but Empowered Canadians is the website is empoweredcanadians.ca. We're on all social media platforms. And like I said, we have some courses. I just thought of launching a debate in December, which I think would be just great. Just having people debate. Let's have an open dialogue. Let's not shame and censor people. Let's just be adults again. And that's the other thing that I just can't believe we're acting like children all the time. And a friend of mine said that I'm like a school teacher on Twitter. It's like, thank you very much for your words. How about this?
Well, you know, what's funny is I think it's very telling that the idea that you have, which is basically democracy, is so radical in this day and age. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Huh?
I'm quite certain Empowered Canadians is getting censored hard on some social media platforms, which is, let's just get informed and educated.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. Eva, once again, thank you so much. You know, just for me, just an average guy out there, you've done so much, and you've been a huge inspiration. And like I said, the time that when I first saw you cross-examine Trudeau, I was like, whoa, this lady is just a ball of flames headed straight for target. It was fantastic. So
I love cross-examining, by the way, so I was very happy to do it. And
yeah, and you got to cross-examine the biggest of them all, right? The biggest, baddest. So for everybody watching, all of the links, Eva's Twitter handle, the Empower Canadians link are right below this video. I encourage you guys all to please follow her. Please go check out Empower Canadians. I'm going to be doing it. You're probably going to see me in a Zoom class or something with taking notes, because I definitely have to brush up on this stuff. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. Eva, once again, thank you so much for this conversation today. It was incredible.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you.